All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending the Fireside Chat, International Approach to Digital Asset Securities. My name is Anthony Bufinsky. I'm head of growth at Arca Labs. In this session, we'll run for about 30 minutes. We'll look to analyze the growing trends within the international digital asset landscape. We'll uncover the international market, where it's been, where we believe it's headed. Our expert panelist today is Christian Platzer. He's co-founder and managing partner of Black Manta Capital Partners. Just a bit of background on Christian. He has a vast range of experience working with startups to global enterprises such as Groupon, where he was International Resources Director for Global Channels. He's managed international teams operating in 30 plus countries, and Christian has lived and worked in Berlin, Zurich, Sydney, Malta, Vienna, and he's passionate about blockchain and the digital asset space. Christian, welcome to the panel.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. It's a pleasure to join online. It's a pity that we cannot meet live in New York, not yet. Let's hope soon with the next conference. So excited to join the interesting panelists today.
Terrific. So you at Arca, we're a US-based institutional grade asset manager. I think we have a very good lens in regards to the US digital asset market space. And I would say most of the audience on this call and participants are US-based. So definitely looking forward to getting your perspective in regards to the international markets. So let's kind of kick it off, right? And start out by having you just do an introduction of Black Manta Capital Partners and your firm's service level offerings to the digital asset space.
Well, with pleasure. Black Manta Capital Partners was founded 2018, first in Luxembourg. We are now a group of 4 entities. Our main entity, operating regulated entities in Germany. It's a regulated financial services institution licensed by BaFin, the German supervisory authority, and under oversight by the German central bank, to whom we report on a quarterly basis. In addition, so we are around on the market since 2019. We are now in the 3rd year audited by KPMG. We've done a bunch of different security token offerings. We see ourselves mainly as a primary market player. So it's everything about the initial offering of a security token. And when you, let's stop. I think you have more questions. I stop.
We do plenty. I appreciate the introduction there. So that'll kind of lead me, why you're based in Germany and Luxembourg, was that by personal choice, by design for the business? If you give a little more flavor on that, that would be helpful.
Well, let's say Luxembourg, there are a variety of reasons to be there as a financial player, as I'm sure also the US audience will know. At the very beginning of our firm, our ideas circulated more around the fund business and tokenizing funds and other vehicles around that, which is a big deal, of course, in Luxembourg. But then we saw very early on that securities tokenization is far broader. And we made the decision that we want to be regulated in the biggest financial markets in the European Union, and that's Germany. And late 2018, we basically took on German regulator BaFin and said, okay, we want to be a broker dealer, more or less. And we want to broker deals in a tokenized form on the blockchain. To the surprise of many, that worked out. So we managed our relationship with BaFin well. And I think what's interesting for the US audience, the European Union is still a very diversified financial market. So when you look at the 27 member states, you primarily look at local capital market law, and you have to apply that local capital market law. But the European Union and its 27 members have managed some harmonization, and the most famous one is the European Markets in Financial Instruments Directive 2, the famous MiFID 2, that basically covers harmonization in regards to securities trading, the respective intermediaries and venues where this is happening. And this helps us, together with freedom of services within the European Union, that we can offer our services in all 27 member states and basically cater to some almost 450 million retail investors and professional investors around. And I think that's that's the sweet spot about the European market at the moment.
And with MiFID especially, right? I mean, that gives the investors, that's a framework, right, for investor protections. It also, enacts measures such as pre and post trade transparency. How does that kind of work in regards to, giving extra protections through the trade cycle, right? Do you see any advantage to that, disadvantage in regards to the business or issuers going to market?
Well, let's put it like that. So let's say we have a client, a company, a startup in the Netherlands is going to run a security token offering. Mm-hmm. So the primary focus on that is the entity is in the Netherlands. So the primary focus is the capital market law there and respective prospectus regulations and so forth. We come in as a regulated player from Germany. The German regulator, we have notified, or the German supervisory authority, BaFin, has notified the supervisory authority in the Netherlands what we are allowed to do. And this is how this works together. And in the end, we run standardized KYC processes that are more or less harmonized around Europe. There are some specifics in each country, but that enables us to leverage some international cooperation between different players and also bring more international investors to a specific offering.
Perfect. So in let's say focusing on Germany and Luxembourg, how was your overall experience, right, in the licensing process and working with those regulators at the local level? Was good?
Well, let's focus with them on Germany, where we run our application back in 2018-19. I think first thing I'd like to say is you have very knowledgeable counterparts. So BaFin in Germany is a big institution. There are many specialized departments and sub-teams. So when you approach them with blockchain and tokenization, you have counterparties that know what's going on. Also, one special thing about Germany is you run basically a dual application at the same time with BaFin, the regulator, and with the central bank. So both institutions look at what you're going to do. And we must say we've seen a very pragmatic approach from both parties. So also from when you read what the German government or the German legislator is planning to do or has implemented, the German position is more or less, summarize it, blockchain's great, it's going to happen, it's going to bring beautiful improvements to the financial markets. We have to regulate it ideally on an EU level, but this will take some time. So we go ahead in certain areas. And to give you one concrete example, Germany has done that in crypto custody legislation, and that has stimulated the market immensely. So in Germany, you look at some 30 plus startups, companies dealing with crypto custody that are seeking to be regulated with BaFin or are now regulated. And that has triggered basically a whole industry. And that also ties up now to tokenize securities in the next step. And we'll definitely see in major European countries more legislation. And at some point, we will see harmonization in the European Union. But for now, let me just add this. And for now, supervisory authorities like BaFin take the approach, as long there is no dedicated legislation, we want to see some things happening, and we apply capital market laws in an analog way. And as long as those parties stick to existing rules and comply with existing regulations, we are fine what's happening there in the space. That's how we operate as of today.
Got it. So in regards to, let's say, those two regions specifically, right? How does that enable you to be a, let's say, digital securities provider? How is that accretive to your business line, being, obviously domiciled in both?
I think so. Well, when basically the label made in Germany still has a certain value and a certain brand. So there were certain things in the past that were not, let's say, to the advantage of the label made in Germany, and also not to the advantage of BaFin when we when we talk about a certain scandal back in the last couple of days. But it's still, you're coming from a serious country, and you're regulated by a serious regulator, and that brings basically trust to the overall operation. And it also helps when you go to some of the smaller countries in the European Union and talk to regulators there. That's also it's basically a different approach. Would say, okay, you've made it through BaFin, you must do some things right. That's basically the approach how we leverage that.
Sure, we have the same with brand equity here, obviously within our regulation system. So duly noted. To pivot now from, let's say, the regulatory side, and taking account, let's say, the current market, what does it look like, for securities issuance from an international standpoint, right? What are the challenges and difficulties you may see for that, as a start, and then we can look at, let's say, the pros and upside in regards to, issuing in the international markets.
Well, I would say let's look at two sides of the deal. One is issuers, and we see huge interest from issuers. We basically get requests almost on a daily basis on different offerings, and that's a broad range from real estate to startups, more grown-up SMEs, also corporates who look into bonds, funds, of course, venture funds, private equity transaction who like to try something out, up to commodities and others. So the interest on the issuer side is huge, and you can feel the need in the market. On the other hand, you have investors, and we've heard that on other panels today. That's something that is currently developed, and especially with the professional ones that takes certain time, and they have to take certain steps. So how does that fit into our investment mandate? How do we deal with the custody question? What other regulatory question do we have to answer? So that usually is a process that takes a couple of years. And when we focus on the international perspective, to round that up, then as I said before, talking about the European Union, capital market law is still diverse within the European Union and, of course, beyond it. So when you look at something, and we're trying to do this with several companies in the US we are working with, and other countries, of course, we try to make transnational, transatlantic, international offerings. But you have to structure this, so there has to be a certain deal size that it makes sense. You have to run the offering in terms of the regulatory bodies in every region you're bringing it to, and that is a certain effort, and that will remain for a certain time, and we'll have to work through that.
Sure. And that kind of goes into, let's say, the current trends that you're seeing, both either from a regulatory perspective, tax, legal. We've seen turning illiquids into liquid instruments, emerging asset classes for, let's say, the advent of multi-asset trading. I've seen reconstituting assets with other digital assets, right, to meet yield to maturity schedules. What kind of trends are you seeing now that are current, and maybe even in the future for the international markets?
Well, I think we could touch on three areas there. The first one, and I think everyone is hearing that, the first one is real estate. And interestingly, there is a lot of push from real estate players. They really like the approach, but we've tried to do a couple deals there, but I think there is a long way to go. I think we'll be leveraging the advantages of tokenization way down the road, especially for real estate, because in most countries still something like real estate connects to something like the land registry, and then in certain countries you need a notary and things like that. Now, in a hopefully not too far distant future, we will be talking about IDs on blockchain, land registries on blockchain, company registry in blockchain, and of course, so that will tie that together. But still, even though blockchain hasn't brought the full advantages of the full potential and advantages of tokenization to the real estate markets, there's a huge interest. The second thing are funds, and I think especially venture funds and others also again real estate funds look into the area. But there, at least in the most important jurisdictions we're looking at in Europe, there will still be some legislation to be done to make that more effective and easier. So we're talking to a series of a whole group of venture funds who find it very interesting. They are the first tokenized funds around that they went to special jurisdictions or had special construction with the LPs and so forth. What's in the end tokenized. But I think that's a huge area we'll see in the next years to develop. And the third area I think we can stress is where the whole space of tokenized securities connects with crypto as the underlying assets. So we have their structures where basically a new asset, crypto, is packaged in for something more or less known old structure, and then later tokenized, or something a new underlying asset comes with a new packaging in form of tokenization. So there are all kinds of combinations there, and I think the area where the investor wants to go crypto and where the professional investor wants to have exposure to crypto but doesn't want to go directly into the underlying, have some structure vehicle in between that's tokenized. That's I think most likely a huge area for the midterm future.
Sure, and I agree in regards to just kind of having crypto as the underlying, right, and a repack kind of structure there, and maybe rehypothecation of assets and securities that becomes really compelling and interesting, especially when you have a blockchain immutable structure where you can track and trace and have tradability, within an asset. I think that's a really kind of compelling venture, and more so, the ability of blockchain to from a compliance, right, and risk mitigation perspective. I think that's the difference between obviously 2008 and now. We have technology that can go ahead and track and trace where collateral is, where it's lent out, and come up with these more creative structures. So we're definitely seeing that here in the U.S. markets, and I'm glad to see it's also in the international markets. I think it provides a very compelling nuance in regards to creating new financial structures as we go forward. So I appreciate that. In regards to, let's say, region, right? Let's talk region and where you see where you're most bullish in regards to digital security issuance. Is that Pan-Asia, Singapore? Obviously, Malta has been, a thought leader in this process. Bermuda for insurance-based assets and just digital assets as a whole. What are you seeing, or where do you feel, most, kind of most bullish in that sector?
So I think definitely some of the ones you mentioned. So definitely there are a lot of things happening in Singapore and other places in Asia that's very interesting to look at, and that's definitely a place at some point we want to be there. We see a lot of development also in the Emirates. Till recently, would say Abu Dhabi Global Markets has had some interesting approaches also with token standards that have been co-approved by the SEC in the US or the SEC in Australia. Interesting thing happening there, but also now Dubai's financial free zone, the IFC, is more friendly to crypto. So we've seen the next rumor that Binance is moving there after they've been in Malta and elsewhere. We once had an office next to the Binance office at Malta Stock Exchange. We don't have that anymore. So you can see that there are some hotspots around. But what I would say is I think the most interesting, and Malta had its own approach in terms of becoming blockchain island. They didn't go too far, or let's say from an international perspective in the end, not the biggest things happened there. There were a lot of interesting conferences, but in terms of projects on the ground, it's let's say it was in an interesting stage, and similar things when you look at Zug Valley in Switzerland. What we believe from our perspective is that we have to look at the biggest financial markets, and I'd say that's Germany. That's at some point Deutsche Börse Frankfurt coming into the game of tokenization. Or or the exchange in Stuttgart, that's London, that's Paris. And when these financial centers in the end move to the game we are already playing, I think then the whole story gets a lot more interesting. So that's where we would look, and we really hope that in the next years we'll see a completely different landscape, because all those players, like when you look at Deutsche Börse or Deutsche Bank and so forth, Goldman Sachs in London, and all the other international players, they all have big teams looking into blockchain and tokenized securities, and sooner or later they are going to bring something to the market, and we are very excited about that.
Yeah, sure. I firmly agree. UAE is definitely on my radar. Obviously, they have the Securities Commodity, SCA, Securities Commodity Authority. They approved, in I believe November 1st, 2020, effectively recognizing digital assets as securities, right? So they're creating that framework, worked a lot with the AGGM. So I think that's definitely high on my list in regards to, more progressive locations. Bermuda as well, in regards to, launching from insurance and other kind of structured products. But it's been a very progressive landscape in regards to adoption of digital assets. So I think we're going to see more and more as we go forward. But I appreciate your insight in regards to, your knowledge in the international perspective. So let's talk about investors, right? What are you seeing in the international market? Has it been, let's say, institutional, high net worth, family office, pension? Who's the dominant player in regards to those markets for investment?
Well, to be completely honest, I think it's a little bit of everything. So we see movement in all sectors, and I think, let's say for certain family offices, it's a little bit easier to move ahead than for institutional investors. We see also group family offices starting to look into that and so forth. We believe that there is definitely room for certain offerings that reach out to the retail space, that is really all about the underlying asset and the actual company behind, and what kind of community is behind the whole deal. I think it's really hard to pinpoint now where this is going. I would really say for now, we believe it makes more sense to look at the professional space and really have retail offerings somewhere on the sideline, and pick those who really match certain criteria and can bring leverage to the respective offering. But apart from that, it's really hard to nail down if it's one specific category. I think there is basically no one, I'd say, or no category that is absolutely not looking at it. So I think as of today, as of 2022, we find open doors everywhere, and we are talking to the most conservative and traditional private banks in Germany, and they know that this is coming, and they look into the space, and we see basically movement in every corner there.
Sure. And in regards to retail, obviously, just even traditional markets, there's a huge bottleneck in regards to, the amount of product that is accessible. Municipal markets, right, here in the United States, as an example, right, it's pretty hard to have real access to, let's say, projects in your backyard that are specified in regards to your investment portfolio. You get an allocation via an ETF or a mutual fund. What types of products, are on your radar in regards to retail? And what are you offering to that kind of segment of the marketplace?
Well, I think if you're going retail with a security token offering, then the company, the underlying asset, has to have some community, some fan base. So our firm is going to do in the first quarter of this year a retail offering for a small boutique brewery in Hamburg that has a certain fan base, as breweries do, and will be a small single-digit million offering, but a very interesting showcase. In general, I'd say especially in our industry, there is a lot of talk about the democratization of venture capital and so forth, and everyone can invest in everything. I'm not so bullish about that. So if you have 10,000 euros or dollars, is it the best only to invest? Is it the best thing to put it into your favorite startup or a venture fund or whatever? There might be other ideas to do so, but when you look at companies, at startups that have a huge fan base, or when you look at sports teams and others that have a huge fan base, then there are definitely offering where it makes sense that those companies, teams, and so forth are somewhat connected to the real estate space, to the retail space, and a security token offering is definitely a smooth way, and also a highly transparent and compliant way to connect the retail investor to assets like that.
Sure. No, I appreciate that feedback. And that kind of, lead us to what both you and I have been in this market for a long time. I've been, in digital asset space since 2018, even before that. The big question, right? Why is this not going any faster, right? And I look at what roadblocks are there, right? Regulation, obviously, lack of offers on the primary market. To me, there's just a lack of product, right, in the marketplace, which ultimately translates into a market, right, for tradability. But until we have that kind of volume, right, the markets are not there. So is it that also, the technology adoption, right? Having, a wallet per se, right? It might be a little daunting to a conventional investor, or, even pension fund, whatever it's going to be. Where do you see, why hasn't this taken off as it should be, right? We're both big believers, and we know it will get there. But what do you think the biggest roadblocks to date have been so far for both domestic and international?
Well, I like this question a lot, and I get it a lot, especially from investors in our companies. And it's a somewhat longer answer, and it's an answer in two parts. Part one is this business and the financial markets are an ecosystem. So we have blockchains, we have technology platforms, we have primary market players like us, we have secondary market players, we have custodians, all kinds of intermediaries. Even thought with blockchain we get rid of intermediaries. When we are in the regulated space, we need those. And every part of that ecosystem is somewhat developed, but the connections are in development. So I think we've relations with some 50 plus companies in Europe and globally. And to bring those relationships to life, it takes certain time, and also to bring markets to life and to bring liquidity to those markets. We've talked about how long it takes, let's say, an institutional investor to bring his investment mandate up to date, to figure out what's custody and so forth. That's one thing, and that's one part of the answer. And the second part of the answer is, of course, you can look at security token offerings and tokenized assets in a way of, okay, there was Bitcoin, and then there was the ICO hype, and now we have just had NFTs. Where are the STOs? That's one perspective you can have, but I think the broader perspective you need to have is far more paradigmatic, and that's a perspective that says, okay, at some point there was the introduction of IBM computing, and then we had the introduction of internet, and now in the 2020s we have the introduction of blockchain to the financial markets and other ecosystems around the financial markets. And this will take a decade or longer to bring that to full bloom. I mean, just look at where the internet was in 1995. Still, you still had companies or banks asking, do we need a website? Do we need email? We just introduced the fax. So, and that's a little bit where we are today. Do we really need tokenization? Or we have other packagings for security. Do we really need that digital packaging? So that's a whole, as I said, paradigmatic change. And and shift also from certain players to others, that simply will take longer. And that's not a phenomenon like NFTs or ICOs. That's a far bigger change to the financial markets. And I think I think we don't meet any players anymore that doubt that this is going to happen. So I think all players on the traditional market see that there is a huge force coming, just when you look at DeFi platforms and others that showcase how big the power of the technology is.
Sure. So we'll bookend with this last question because I know we're running up on time. But what's Black Manta Capital Partners' international ambitions for 2022? And what other jurisdictions are you kind of exploring right now?
So, of course, we want to execute more in our home yard in the European Union. There are 27 countries to execute security token offerings. We've done those in a handful of countries. We want to execute there more. We are looking, of course, into Switzerland and probably starting our licensing process there later this year, because it's an interesting place surrounded by the European Union. Yeah. And then I'd say two other jurisdictions we earlier mentioned in this fireside chat. That would be the UAE for Middle East and Singapore for Asia. And in the US, we have a series of regulated players we already work with. It's just seen Pat Lavecchio of Oasis, our friends in Darien, Connecticut. So there are some interesting players in the US we'd like to do more with and to work closer together.
Terrific. Well, I think that says enough, and really appreciate your time and insight into the international markets for digital assets. Thank you so much, Christian.
Thank you so much. We're doing our own little conference in June in Munich. MSTC Live is the website, Munich Security Token Conference. So check that out and pre-register on that one. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Have a nice one. Cheers from Munich.